All right, so we are going to be presenting the results of what we did as our class project, and which we're hopefully finishing very soon this week, looking at urban biodiversity conservation in Atlanta. Let me grab the pointer. All right, so we partnered up with the Nature Conservancy, and most of us are probably fairly familiar with what they do in terms of land conservation, and they are trying to kind of expand their presence in Atlanta, either through working with partners or possibly purchasing land, and they're really interested in how to prioritize areas with high biodiversity potential. So we went into this project with this goal of trying to create a tool for them that would allow them to focus on areas with a high potential for biodiversity. We had a couple guidelines from them that we took from focal interviews they did with stakeholders, and also interviews they did with other partners and stakeholders in the Atlanta area, looking at specifically water resources. So again, throughout sort of our conversations with them, there was a little bit of this focus on water. There are a lot of people in Atlanta who are concerned about water, so we took that into account when we were thinking about biodiversity. So our main goals were to synthesize the distribution of biodiversity potential within the Atlanta metropolitan area. This actually ended up being quite a large area, a little bit outside of what we think of as the main downtown Atlanta area. We wanted to also integrate multiple perspectives from the natural and social sciences and perspectives and different types of data, and explore the impact that differing value schemes would have on how we quantify and assess biodiversity potential.
Okay. So just kind of a general overview of our method. We basically gathered a lot of types of data, biophysical, ecological, and social. And then we used indices that took in all of this data and gave us an index of biodiversity. And the way we kind of calculated this was somewhat subjective, but it was based, we tried to look through the primary literature and find reasonings for reasons why things like canopy cover might be contributing to potential biodiversity. And then an important facet of this was that we compared multiple scenarios. So we didn't just create one biodiversity index, we created multiple, so that depending on your stakeholders or your perspectives and values, you could consider all of these things rather than just having one. So as I said, we had a variety of layers, and we kind of thought of them under these four broad categories. So biophysical, wildlife, socio-ecological, and socioeconomic. And within each of these layers, we had kind of an internal ranking scheme. So I'm not going to go through all of them because that would take a long time. But if we just look at land cover, for example, we scored it based on a higher value contributing more to biodiversity. And because of TNC's emphasis on water and wetlands, we gave places with open water, woody wetlands, and emergent herbaceous wetlands a score of 5, and then decreasing down the scoring chart down to developed and barren land, which we thought of as having very little contribution to biodiversity potential, receiving a score of 1. So we did this for all of these layers. And these are just some examples of the types of layers we had in data. So, for example, proximity to water, we made by calculating distance to water sources. We also had the native species distributions, which was made of data from the Department of Natural Resources, but also drawing on things like eBird or iNaturalist, which are citizen science data sources. And because these were just point data, we did some transformation. So this, for example, is a kernel density map of that data. And then we also had social data, like I said, which was gathered by the census. And so this data was already kind of blocked by census block group. And then we had other data such as urban green spaces and parks, which we applied a buffer to with the idea that a park, while will also have kind of an effect on an area, buffering it as far as biodiversity potential. And so, like I said earlier, we created multiple scenarios from multiple perspectives. So we had 5 scenarios, and if you see on the left, those are all of the layers, and the scoring would be how much each layer contributed to biodiversity. So we had a baseline where everything was just kind of equal. We had ecological, where layers that we thought of as being more ecological type layers, such as proximity to water and species presences, contributed more to the overall index. Restoration, in which we gave more weights to areas that might not have a lot of biodiversity now, but have a lot of biodiversity potential. And then we had 2 more socioeconomic layers, which we termed status quo and equity. And you'll notice their weights are the same, but so what we actually did was we changed the internal ranking. So for the status quo layer, this was based on some of the ideas that arise in the literature, such as that more dense populations or wealthier populations might tend to be correlated with higher biodiversity potential. But kind of being our icon-y selves, we realize that a lot of this is due to historical context or just other reasons that don't actually show a cause and effect. And so we wanted to kind of play the opposite side. So in the status quo one, we did rank more educated, wealthier populations with lower population densities as contributing more to biodiversity potential. And then in the equity, we tried to reverse this to say, well, how's a way that we can kind of right some of these environmental injustices? I think that's the end of mine. Back to you.
All right, so these are just a few of our results, and I won't really talk very much about the maps in detail, really. These are our baseline, our restoration, and our ecological maps. I just want to point out there are differences between them. So, these different valuation schemes did actually end up producing different types of maps that show areas ranked, prioritized in different ways. Because we did focus some of our efforts on water, a lot of the green areas that are high biodiversity potential do tend to fall along waterways. And then again, just to point out this socioeconomic scenario, the equity one in particular, we felt strongly it was important to include this just because of our own kind of values and our clients' values in terms of social and environmental justice. So this is just one of those maps in a little closer detail. This is actually 2 maps subtracted from one another, so you can more easily see the differences between these 2 different types of scenarios. So if you're trying to decide what does restoration versus ecological scenario look like, you can just more easily visualize the differences that result from those 2 different value systems. So these maps are part of our final project to our client, but it's really the model that is the product that we're giving them. So they can change this. It's very flexible. TNC can go in and change how these variables are weighted against one another based on their own values, their stakeholder values. It's very flexible and reproducible. So we feel that was one of the more important parts of our approach.
Thank you. Coming up to here was not an easy journey. So we have to face lots of difficulties, especially on the data limitation, because like most of the data were from public available data. So, and then there was a mismatch between spatial and temporal scale. And then another was the valuation of demographic factors and environment equity. And then one of the main thing was we are trying to work on the qualitative data and quantitative data, and working on those data at the same time was one of the hardest job that we have to face. And then the time schedule conflict, as we are from the different department, taking different classes, it's very hard to get a common time that it can work for us. And then another hard part was, as we are from the different department, we have our own inclination. Like I'm more inclined towards forestry, and I will put forestry as a more important on biodiversity. And someone else is from different department, and they might put socioeconomic factors as a more important on a ranking. So it was very hard to come up and incorporate our multiple perspective on ranking.
Yeah, and I think being being sort of reflective about the difficulties and challenges of this project is part of that sort of icon-y experience, but also acknowledging that, while, there were those sort of navigating periods of kind of deciding how we wanted to approach this project with this partner and thinking about how to sort of incorporate the icon philosophy in practice. And I think there are inevitably going to be tensions there, but I think we can say there are a lot of successes along that road and through that process as well. And so I think a part of this whole experience is being reflective about that and reflexive about that and thinking about what makes this project integrative. How can we, as sort of an icon cohort, contribute valuable insights and perspectives with a sort of a collaborative partner like TNC. And I think throughout that experience we learned a lot, and part of this bridge semester, which was kind of an extra semester given to think through some of the dimensions that we wanted to include in this project, and how to make it our own, I think was an important consideration as well. As Suraj had identified, there were institutional and logistical limitations in that way, but I think one of the sort of central things that we kept coming back to was acknowledging that because we have different perspectives and because we're engaging in sort of this new sort of integrative team science, at least with each other, that we can think about how our perspectives are sort of integrated, not in just how we use data or we choose which data to use, but also in being reflexive about the kinds of biases that we're introducing, the kinds of assumptions that we make when we're creating these maps. And I think being reflective about that is important. And I think we were able to also demonstrate the way in which we can create different scenarios and therefore foster sort of that icon philosophy by suggesting in sort of a physical, visual way that there are different perspectives and there are different ways of approaching these sort of output maps, and one perspective, one choice can result in an entirely different representation of biodiversity in that area. And so, I think there are a number of things that we could have done that might have made that process a little bit more collaborative, a little bit more participatory when you're thinking about working with community members and different stakeholders. Having more of a face-to-face interaction with neighborhoods or communities where we identify areas of high biodiversity potential. It would have been very interesting to get on the ground and have that sort of ground truth, finer scale resolution of some of these areas, and maybe an area that was highlighted as green as being of high biodiversity potential. That's where our large Walmart complex is. Like we didn't really get to that fine grain point of analysis, but I think one of the great successes from this and learning what it means to be sort of a part of a team is acknowledging that we can sort of foster a relationship between different institutions, and doing so I think can sort of set us along a productive path for the future of this partnership. And I think just in closing, we would really value your feedback. Any sort of thoughts you have on this process, we would greatly appreciate. And I think we also all just wanted to give a special thanks and recognition of Ashley for being a badass scientist and very dear friend. And she was with us through this whole process. So thank you guys for your time.
So I guess I'm the moderator, so I have to keep us going. I don't know if we have time for questions, but if anyone has any burning questions, please raise your hand. Okay, we'll take one, maybe two.
How did you guys manage the leadership of the project? Or I know in our cohort, that was you're like in a room of leaders and everyone has a different specialty, but everyone wants to collaborate. How did your group kind of manage the workload and the creative process?
Well, I think that was one of the interesting challenges is recognizing that we have different skill sets, and I think learning what those skill sets are was just as much a part of this process as well. Sort of getting to know how we choose to think through these different things, and I think we each brought different sort of leadership or held different leadership roles in different capacities, like different points of the project.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It kind of shifted through time from my perspective, I think, as well as kind of biting off different chunks of the project.
And did it happen organically, or did you guys have pointed discussions about it, or?
I don't think we ever had any discussions about leadership. No, it just kind of, it just kind of happened.
Small cohort, so
Yeah.
I think that helps. But yeah.
So I'm in kind of a unique position in relation to your project, which is that I did my internship with TNC and I worked with Miriam, and I did that I think the semester before you guys started to plan. And so it's really cool to see that you developed a model for them that incorporates a lot of really different data streams, because in my experience with them, they're very ecology-centric. They're not real interested in sociology. I mean, Miriam is, but most people there are not. And so it's really cool to see you kind of pulling that into this model for them and saying, this is important, so here it is. And I hope it helps them, because some of their planning processes are a little bit, well, they're very siloed. So I think it's a really cool project.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, we should probably move on, but